And I'm so glad you could join us today for a look at creating a bee-friendly garden. Bees are a bit of a hidden treasure in our yards. We all know about the ever-present honeybees, and the bumblebees are hard to miss. They're so big. But there are almost 700 bee species here in Oregon, and they mostly go unnoticed. Today, we're going to take a deeper look into the secret world right outside your door. Bee populations are in decline due to a combination of human-caused stressors, parasites and pests, pathogens, poor nutrition, pesticides. And often when someone says the word bee, people picture a honeybee. They're social bees that congregate together in very large colonies of 40,000 to 100,000. But 90% of the bees in our world are solitary bees who do not colonize or have hives. Of those, 70% are ground dwelling, creating small, solitary nests underground with nothing but a small hole to indicate their presence. Urban gardeners can help provide a refuge space for wild bees. A bee refuge contains flowering plants, species for food, and both soil and cavity nesting sites can help minimize the adverse impact on pollinators. There have been 4,337 species of bees identified in North America and Hawaii. We only have the conservation status of 7.3%. That's 317 species out of 4,337. Of those, only 133 species are considered to be conservationally secure. That means 184 of the very small number of bees that we can identify are vulnerable to extinction. And the other 4,207, we just don't know how they're doing. The exciting news is that Oregon is the first state in the nation to form a master melittologist program of trained community scientists dedicated to preserving and cataloging bees that are native to the state. Intensively trained volunteers carry out meticulous work of locating and cataloging the bees in our state, some of which have never been seen before. It's exciting when they find a bee that we didn't know existed here. As I was doing my research, the numbers kept climbing from 500 a few years ago to almost 700 today. Another effort to identify bees and their habitat is the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas. I had the great fun of being part of that project team of citizen scientists. Oregon and Washington were divided into grid cells that volunteers could adopt. The mission was to go out and capture bumblebees in a specified time period, chill them, note the floral host, and then photograph them for identification. After they warmed up, they flew away, no harm done. And anyone can be a citizen scientist and contribute data about bumblebee sightings. All you need is a camera. It is this work and the Master Melittologist program that is increasing our knowledge of the diversity and wonder of the bees in the Pacific Northwest. It serves to establish a baseline of bee diversity and health to measure against in the future. By learning differences in bee nesting sites and behavior, you may become more aware of the bees in your garden. So that's the first of our objectives today. Then we're going to take a few minutes to talk about managed bees like mason bees and honeybees that we know fairly well. And then we'll hit the 10 strategies you can incorporate to make your yard more bee friendly. I want you to note that at the end of this slide presentation, we will have a list of resources, and that will be also available when you get the recorded link sent to you. You will have a list of resources. So don't feel like you need to take notes and make sure you get all of the resources listed. Part of my goal in doing a presentation like this is to point you to areas where you can do your own further exploration of things you're interested in. There's just too much to cover to go over it all. So I just want to give you the tools to find out what you need to know. Okay, let's first take a look at social bees. The two most well-known bees in our area are both in the social classification. Both bumblebees and honeybees are often the first bees you see in the spring. and it's not uncommon for them to be seen on a nice day in February or March. With temperatures up to in the 70s this weekend, I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot of bees. Bumblebees have much smaller colonies and are much smaller than honeybee hives. They don't make honey, but they do have a division of labor in foraging and taking care of the brood. Honeybees, the average colony number is 60,000 and it can go up to 100,000. There's only one queen per colony, but she can lay 2,000 eggs a day. They have a lifespan of 2 to 5 years, so they can live over long periods of years. Typical is 2 to 3. Um, when the hive is getting too big, the queen will lay another queen egg and some drones, and they will mature mate, and go out and start a new colony. They're capable of communicating floral resource locations, and they can travel up to 3 miles. So I wanted to show you a waggle dance. And this is how a bee who has found a great source of flowers goes back to the hive and tells the others where it could be. And think about this. This could be like over for 2 miles. So when a bee finds food, they go back to the nest to tell the colony where it is. They communicate the direction of the source by how they angle their bodies and by how far the source, they angle their bodies, and then how long the source will, how far away is how long the source will go. My apologies, this is not working as I had planned. There we go. Okay. That's what I wanted to show you. So you can see she's traveling in the same direction over and over again, and that's telling the other bees around her where to go. But sometimes there's a dangerous thing hidden in the bees. And the bee that's telling the other bees where to go, if one of her sisters knows that there's something dangerous there, she will headbutt the bee that's doing the waggle dance and tell her to stop. Don't go there. This is not where we're supposed to go. And this is a perfect example. If you can see the crab spider here has already gotten a bee, and she could have seen that and said, okay, let's go look for someplace else, some other source of nutrition. Okay, bumblebees. One of the things that they do that honeybees cannot is they're buzz pollinators. They live again in a nest, not in a hive like the managed bees do. They live in a nest underground or possibly in a tree cavity. They have long tongues and they can buzz pollinate. And buzz pollination is advantaged when some flowers that have stored their pollen in enclosed at the tip of the anthers. And then the bees grab onto that anther and then buzz really, really fast with their wings. And that opens up the anther and lets the pollen come out. Then she grooms the pollen, puts it on her hairs and from the hairs and puts them in a pollen basket on her legs. But not every grain is captured, and that is deposited in the next flower. Honeybees have a typically we top out about 400 individuals. So compare that to a bumblebee 400. Honeybee has 60,000. So they're quite a bit smaller in terms of their nest size. Next classification is the solitary bees. And I often think of them as the single working mom. She works so hard for her family and she doesn't get any help from anybody. Males emerge first in their cycle. They mate and then they die. And then the mom does all the rest. After they're finished provisioning their nest and laying the eggs, she dies. And then the next generation won't emerge for another 9 to 10 months. Cavity nesting bees, of the solitary bees, 30% are cavity nesting. And they need cavities in things like deadwood and hollow stems, brush piles. And they also use cavities that are provided for the managed bees that are provided by humans, like laminate blocks and tubes. And sometimes they make poor choices in where they build their nest. If you look at the electrical outlet here, um, some poor, not too bright bee has laid eggs in there. That's not a recipe for success. Ground nesting bees make up the other 70% of solitary bees. They need access to bare soil. And those solitary, some species will nest kind of close together. They may even use the same hole to get into underground, but then they have their separate little condominium nurseries in that area. The last thing we're going to talk about is parasitic bees. And they don't collect pollens. They raid another bee's nest and lay their eggs on that bee's pollen ball. Their eggs mature first and devour the larva of the host bee, or they devour all the pollen ball, so there's nothing left when the larva hatches. Bees that take on, there are parasitic bees that take on a honeybee nest, and they have a harder time of it because they've got to end up having to kill some of the worker bees who are trying to defend the hives. And this little guy right here, the white striped painted dark bee, was a parasitic bee that I found in one of my mason bee houses. And you can see she scoped out things here and she's getting ready to go in. And I didn't stop her because it was just fascinating to watch what she was doing. Now that we know a bit more about the habits and lifestyles of the bees in your backyard, let's explore ways that we can help them thrive. We're going to go through 10 different things, and we'll start with the best practices for managed bees. Urban beekeeping has become very popular, and many people in cities around the world have started keeping more bees. One problem with this is that each of those colonies needs acres of flowers, and there's not enough room for that in urban areas. Another problem is that many of these beekeepers are new to beekeeping and don't know how to keep their colonies healthy. Since there are many more colonies close to each other, urban bees can become a hotbed of honeybee pests and diseases. Both honeybees and native bees do better when honeybee colony numbers are limited and there are enough flowers to support all of them. Some urban bee areas are home to native bees that are at risk of extinction and need all the help that they can get to survive. And this is a publication by the Xerces Society on why getting a hive won't necessarily save the bees. So the basic thing is, if you're interested in saving bees, focus on creating habitat and not honeybees. So manage bees in the home garden. They're manipulated in some fashion. We provide nesting materials, we take them out, we clean them, we put them in the refrigerator for the winter so that they stay cold. There's just lots of different things we can do. But it's really fun to actually be a part of their lifestyle and watch the whole thing as they mature and start pollinating our crops. I know that in our garden, our apple and pear trees have really increased with adding the blue orchard bees. Honeybees, researchers estimate that wild bee populations provide half of the crop pollination services worldwide, but the other half is that honeybees do that. They're the mainstay of managed bee pollination due to the numbers in each hive, and that they can be transported from place to place. They will forage on pretty much anything, although they don't have the ability to pollinate things that need buzz pollinating like tomatoes. To manage honeybees, you need to have training and special equipment and clothing. So it's quite a bit more complicated than just doing mason bees, but you get honey. So the managed bees that we have that people work with, mason bees, again, are probably one of the easiest for the home gardeners. Leafcutter bees are becoming more popular these days, more availability. What's available, like to buy online or something, is usually the alfalfa leafcutter bee, which is not native to our area, but they could manage to do okay here. We do have three native leafcutter bees in the Portland area. So if you put out leafcutter bee houses, you might and have some alfalfa leafcutter bees, you might also get some of the native bees taking advantage of that. One of the things I want to point out in this picture is look at all of the pollen on this little bee belly. Uh, Mason bees, most solitary bees are covered with hair. They're very furry, and that really is great for pollen transfer. Bumblebees are managed bees also, but that's usually just in greenhouse situations. They can travel, they can breed a hive of honeybees and move them from greenhouse to greenhouse. One of the problems with that is that some of them they get, because of the close proximity, again, it's easy to develop pathogens and pests, and if they escape, then they take that out into the wild population. Alkali bees are another managed bee, but they're not kept in containers. The only way to manage an alkali bee is to provide a great source of nesting, ground nesting area, and it's very precise, very dry, and alkaline soil, and they've really developed a really great way of having just acres of these bees. Um, but again, that's not something for the home garden. So the difference in how managed bees can help you out, mason bees can do the work of 700 honeybees because of the pollen that they can carry on their bodies. Honeybees basically get the pollen and they take it and they put it in their pollen baskets and they take it back to the nest. Um, Mason bees are and leafcutter bees are just messier. They hit the flower and it gets all over them, and then they transfer that pollen from flower to flower. So managed cavity nesting bees. Mason bees use mud to separate their egg cases, and they're excellent for apples, pears, and almonds, active from mid-March to June. But then in the fall, they should be cleaned and stored. You don't want to take out your cocoons right after they're finished in June. You want to put them away someplace, but then over the summer, they will develop into a fully formed adult bee, but they'll still be in the cocoon. So that's a time where you can take the cocoons out, clean them, get rid of all the parasites, which we'll go over in just a few minutes, and then put them in the refrigerator and keep them cold until it's time for them to go back to work. So leafcutter bees use flowers instead of mud to separate their different egg chambers. And as I was cleaning my mason bees this fall, and there was just so much dried mud around. And then I started thinking about leafcutter bees, and I thought, well, if I'm going to clean my bees, if I'm going to be a good bee person, I'm going to clean those. It'd be way more fun to do with bees that are encased in flowers and leaves than in mud. So that's something I'm thinking about doing this. So the cocoons are harvested in the fall and then they're held in storage, but they're not cleaned. You can't put leafcutter bee cocoons in the water. That's not how they're made. So basically, you take the leafcutter bees out and you just put them away, and then the way you get them to hatch is they incubate at about 70 degrees. So you bring them out when the temperatures are warmed up and then hatch, and then they can use the same houses as mason bees. You just have different liners and tubes to take care of them. So here's a leafcutter bee life cycle. They emerge and mate. Well, this little bee coming out. Look at this picture of this bee carrying a little section of leaf to her nest. And here's a pollen ball. There's the larva. Then they stop until spring, And then when it gets warm again, then they go out and they develop then and emerge and do their work. So, nutritional resources for bees. Be aware that the flower resources in your area when planning to bring bees into your yard. Make sure that they have sufficient resources to support them if you're working with mason bees within 300 feet of where they'll be active. They do not have the ability to travel. So if you don't have the resources when they hatch, they will go elsewhere. And if they can't find anything close enough, they will die. So on the right, here's a publication, and this is about honeybees and how best to manage them in urban and suburban areas. And one of their recommendations is to limit the number of hives. Make sure that you're not putting too many hives in an area because they can travel so far, but they can also use up all of the resources available for native bees. So I'm going to just hammer on this cleaning the mason bees or any bee that you're managing carefully. These are some of the things that can get in your. This is a particularly ugly mason bee thing, but these other things are mites. The black is frass, but then some of the things that you can find in your mason bee tubes would be again the mites, and they can get so heavy that they can keep a honeybee or a bee, I'm sorry, from flying. There would be the weight of too many mites keeps them from flying and then they die. Here's wasps, little teeny tiny wasps that can basically lay an egg in the cocoon, and then that will take care of that bee. And the Houdini fly is one of the big things that we're worried about right now. This was just discovered in Washington in a couple of years ago, and it's basically really had a sad effect on the bees in the UK. It's tiny. It's just a little like a fruit fly, but it's a kleptoparasite. And they're found in the past few years, again in Washington, and now recently in Portland. They lay eggs in the chamber, the female's preparing for her eggs, and the Houdini hive's eggs hatch first, eat all the pollen, and leaving the mason bee larva to starve. So if you do not take care of your mason bee cocoons or your leafcutter bee cocoons, these things just breed and breed and breed, and they will have a really bad effect on our populations of bees. Okay, let's get on to something else now. Pesticide-free zone. Pesticides rarely solve the problem that allows the pests to flourish. And there are so many alternatives that are so much easier and safer to do for both the bees and people. Insecticides can kill the good guys, and having a few holes in your plant is a sign of a thriving ecosystem. Pesticide free is good for bees. So integrated pest management, it's basically a way to create a healthy plant development and beneficial insects that are less hospitable to pests and diseases. One of the first things you do is to set your action threshold, develop a tolerance for imperfection. It's much better to have a few holes in your leaves and spray pesticides that not only kills the culprit, but every bee and butterfly that dines on the same plant, and the bird that eats the bee for lunch. It's a cycle of death. Monitor and identify your pests. Not all insects, weeds, and other living organisms require control. If action must be taken, identify the problem, and the least toxic solution is best. And this is one of my favorite IPM solutions. Insecticides that contain the active ingredient pyrethrin are effective chemical control against aphids. But apart from killing the aphids instantly, pyrethrin can be detrimental to natural predators. They're equally dangerous to bees, especially when they come in contact with them. But ladybug larvae are voracious. One larva will eat 400 aphids in the 3 week before it pupates. While ladybug's favorite food seems to be aphids, they also will prey on soft scale, whitefly, pupa, thrips, and spider mites if no aphids are available. Besides other insects, lady beetles also feed on pollen. One of the things that, people love to do is to get a nice batch of ladybugs from their local nursery, and that's a wonderful idea. Just beware of when you put them out. So it's best like to put them out in the evening and make sure that there's a water source for them because they're thirsty. Um, and I'm not talking a big bowl of water, but like wet leaves and stuff. And then when they wake up in the morning, they're refreshed and they can start looking around. But there's not a huge success rate of when you put ladybugs out in your garden that they're going to stay there. Um, they just need to find the right food. Neonics, easier to say. And when I first heard of neonics, I thought this was just what an amazing thing. The plant will be protected from aphids and sucking insects, and I don't have to spray pesticides. And then I learned that they travel throughout a plant via its vascular system, and the chemicals go to all parts of the plant, and they can last there for up to 3 years. It's highly toxic to bees. So when you look for tags on plants, look for something that says neonic free. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. There's also an article buying bee safe plants from the Xerxes Society. So number 3 in our list of things to do to make a bee friendly garden, plant trees and shrubs. Now, why did I start here? Well, when you're designing a landscape, the first things you usually figure out where they're going to go are trees and large shrubs. So that's where we're going to start too. Some of the best pollinator plants in our region are shrubs and trees. They include fruit trees, particularly cherries and apples, which have abundant and nutritious pollen and high concentrations of nectar. They're also good for forage and for bee nests, and they provide resources to other wildlife. This is a poster from the Pollinator Partnership from 2016. And I just love it's much bigger than this section that you're seeing, but you can see all the flowers. And then there's little cavity nesting. It's just such full of life. And that's really what our trees can do. OSU Extension has a thing called Shrubs and Trees for Bees, and they've got a great list. And these are two of the favorite for in the spring, red flowering currant and the Oregon grape. But they've got a whole bunch more on that list. I think there was about 50. This is one of my favorite books, and I take it with me every time I go to the nursery, just for my reference, and so I can show other people at the nursery if I can get them to talk to me. These are trees that are native to this covers all native plants, but this particular, I looked up like vine maple, and it tells you how big it's going to get, if it's hard or easy to grow, what kind of rainfall it needs, and then what it supports. So beneficial insect, bees, birds, and then where it grows. So in this list, in this Native Plants for Willamette Valley Yards, which is downloadable on the internet, here are the lists that they have available in our area. And of these, I have everything but the bitter cherry, I think, in my yard. Provide year-round floral resources. Now, when I was preparing this talk, I did a very informal Facebook survey. And the question was, what are your favorite flowers for bees? And most of the website pages that are groups that I belong to are gardening, surprise, surprise. And they have some really knowledgeable people on there. And I got a list of 80 different flowers that are favorites for people, for bees. But you know what came out top? dandelions and lavender, neck and neck. So plant a variety of shape and plant families. Long-tongued bees, like bumblebees, visit flowers with bilateral symmetry and with a longer flower length, such as vetches and clovers. Lupins are a huge favorite of the bumblebees in my yard. Short-tongued bees, which most of the major bee families, including mining bees and sweat bees, prefer easily accessible composite flowers, think daisies kind of thing, made up of multiple simple flowers, such as sunflower. To ensure that a broad array of pollinators benefit from plants in your landscape, include plants across different plant families with a broad range of flower types. These include plants with disc flowers, urn-shaped flowers, and flowers with bilateral symmetry. Check the bloom time. Remember that honeybees and bumblebees can be active easily 10 months out of the years. So this is a chart that I have from uh, a program that I have on my computer, but you can do something like this easily on a piece of graph paper if you want. And remember who you're feeding. So if you're feeding honeybees, you need sources all the way through the year. And if you're feeding solitary bees, you need to plan bloom for when they're going to be active. So in March, April, May, I know I've got to have really good floral resources for the mason bees. In June, July, August, got to have resources for the leafcutter bees. And then that down season between August and September is really a challenging time sometime to get really good resources. So you can find flowers that will bloom at that time and focus on those. One of my favorite ways to find good native flowers for our area is the Oregon Flora, and it's easy, oregonflora.org. And you can go in and you can say, okay, I want to choose the right plant for my garden. And then I can specify what height, what width, if I want a certain flower color, when it blooms. I can really just focus down on what exactly I want. And then it gives me a list of all of the different native plants that would be suitable for my space. This is from the Garden Ecology Lab, which is just has so much fascinating information. And they did a study on the diversity and abundance of bees on these native flowers. And the outer white circle represents bee abundance, just how many bees. Then the inner circle represents how many kinds of bees for each plant. And if you look at Douglas aster, you can see that it not only has the largest number of bees visiting it, but also the largest diversity of bees visiting it. But you can see some of these just have just really fascinating, maybe a lot of bees, but not maybe so many diverse number of bees. So it's just kind of one way to look at what you're going to plan to plant. And then this is where our survey comes in. The abundance of honeybees on lavender does not necessarily mean it's a poor resource for native bees. So when people were thinking, okay, what are the plants that the bees like? And it's lavender. But if you look at your lavender full season, what you're mostly going to see there are bumblebees and honeybees. And then, so you've got a lot of bees, but very few different types of bees. So plants that support a wide diversity of bee species are really good to have in your garden as well. And take a look at the Douglas aster. And that's an amazing plant to have. And it happily spreads, fair warning, but it's fairly easy to control. The lavender is also a good place, good to have, because there's a theory, and it's being researched, that if you have a lot of lavender, that's where the honeybees will go because they're used to that and it's easy and they like it. And and so they will leave some of these other flowers alone to leave more pollen and nectar for native bees. And nurseries are always looking for the next best thing. Want it more colorful, more petals, more fragrant, smaller, taller. But in studies of what insects prefer, the results are mixed in terms of like if you're having a cultivar or a native, or there's just really no hard and fast rules yet. But if you're purchasing a plant at the store and you want to have something that's really beneficial to bees, having something like this simple rose where it's easy to find the nectar and pollen, as opposed to something with a lot of different leaves where it's really hard to get into and may not have as much nutrition resources. So if you're just shopping for bees, go simple. This is from Enhancing Urban and Suburban Landscapes to Protect Pollinators. And again, that's an Oregon State Extension publication. And it's just got these are all native. Look at how beautiful that garden is going to be. And it carries the different things it's planting in. It's got areas for bees to plant here, bees to nest. So with some dry soil, it's got swaths of flowers, different kinds of flowers throughout the blooming season, and from wet to dry. So it's a good resource just to kind of say, okay, here's a place I could go to get some ideas. And then there's plants here that are non-native and native mixed. And so many of the plants in the survey that people said, well, these are my favorites, were things that are not necessarily native, but are still really attractive and supportive of bees. So bee balm was on the top of the list, bluebeard, catmint or nepeta, black-eyed Susans. These are all plants that were people really talked about in terms of what they considered bee-friendly plants. So they're not native, but they're a great pollinator source. And the last part of this is for your year-round floral resources. If you're going to put it in, oftentimes you will need to prepare your ground. And this is just, I put this in, this is a great way to get your site ready. It gives you several different methods of doing it organically and safely. Okay, number 5, plant in swaths. I say swaths. Oftentimes the literature says blocks, but a block of flower just doesn't seem as lovely as a swath of flowers. So we're going to talk about that. I think of this as the corner grocery store versus going to Costco. So many of our native bees are tiny, a quarter of an inch smaller, and they can only travel 200 to 400 feet between where they're nesting and where they need floral resources. Honeybees can travel miles. So the native small bees need a corner grocery store that's close by to them and that they can take advantage of. The honeybees can get in the car, go to Costco and get all of the massive things that they need. But the native bees need the corner grocery store. And in this corner grocery store, we have a swath of fireweed. We've got willow right here that can, on the right-hand side, that is a terrific source for bees. And we have salal and then some Agastaki hyssop and some coneflowers that aren't quite blooming yet, and then some bare ground to nest in. And off to the right here, I've got a little water source too. So this is basically corner grocery store shopping and just an easy way to provide for bees. Now, when we talked about trees, I'm going to talk about trees as swaths too, because basically if you've got a flowering tree, you're taking up a lot of real estate. It's just vertical. So having flowering trees are a great way to have swaths, especially if you've got a small yard. You can have small trees growing into it. Number 6, shop wisely. Pick the right plant for the right place so that you have a plant that's going to be healthy where it is and is much less uh, susceptible to disease and pathogens. There's nothing wrong with buying a cultivar or an ornamental. Just be aware that this may affect the nutritional use of your plants to the pollinators. So here's a way to identify wild type native plants. And this again is from the Garden Ecology Lab. And it basically goes through about how to, here's a cultivar, subspecies, straight species, cultivar mix. And so in this, we would normally say the cultivar, the straight species would be most beneficial to bees, but some of these others have been proven to do just as well, maybe not quite as stellarly, but just know what you're buying. And then choose plants rich in nutrition. So recently, we've just had a lot of development of sunflowers that they're called teddy bear sunflowers, or they're basically bred for lots of petals, or they're bred so that they don't have any pollen, which gives them a longer vase life for people who are for florists. But they're really not good for bees. And the ones with lots of petals, the bees can't get to the pollen and nectar. And the ones that don't have pollen don't provide a nutritional, they may still have nectar, but they don't provide the nutritional resources of pollen. Pollen is basically protein for bees, and nectar is basically carbohydrate. So you're skipping out on the protein that they would need. So, and there's a couple of a few sunflowers that are really terrific pollen producers. Autumn Beauty, Lemon Queen, and Black Russian all are great. And then there's the Great Sunflower Project that you can get involved in, and it's basically they plant lemon queen sunflowers, and then you keep track of how many bees you have and how that all works. Well, just if you're interested in doing something like that, I mean, who doesn't want to grow sunflowers? They're so fun. And then when you buy plants, make sure you get plants that have not been treated with neonics. So if you see this, the plant is protected from aphids and whiteflies and beetles and mealybugs, you know that it's been treated with neonicotinoids. So what you want to buy is look for something that says be safe, neonicotinoid free. You need to provide water for your bees. And I have seen bees don't need water. Well, yeah, they do. And to provide water, you must have a source where they can sit on something and like basically like get their feet wet, but not drown. And I had a mason bee nest where the bees had emerged before I was ready for them. The only thing I had near there was a bird bath that didn't have any pebbles or anything in it, so it was a little bit too deep. And the bees went to get water and they started drowning. So I'm hauling mason bees out of the bird bath and trying to save them. And then I put some pebbles in so they could be safe. But especially when we had the heat dome a couple of years ago, it was really important to make sure that you had water available for the bees, like in especially the heat of the day and everything, when things were so dry. Just having something as simple as a dish with some pebbles and water in it would really make a big difference. Okay, if you want to have native bees in your yard, you need to provide nesting materials and nesting sites. And you could purchase nesting materials if you're just looking for mason bees and leafcutter beads, but all the other bees need things like pithy stems, bare ground. Some even will do empty snail cases, but that's not something you're going to provide. But a great way to do it is to have a brush pile, basically. And it's really easy when you're cleaning up your yard to not just take them all to the dumpster or, compost heap, but set aside where you're going to provide pithy stems in there and things like raspberries, milkweed, um, anything that has kind of a hollow stem is a great resource to put in there. The bees can find it. And then underneath that would be bare ground. Now, the problem thinking about bare ground and mulch, you need to, we all like to have mulch, but leave some spaces for the bees to get to as well. And they can be underneath little rock piles and just feathered out like by the trees and stuff, where you just have some spaces where you've got dry, uncovered ground. Here's multi-use real estate. This is an old birch trunk and it's got some sedum in it. So I've got pithy stems, rotting logs. There's a bare ground underneath and there's water right behind, right beside here. This is a bee magnet, folks, got to tell you. Okay, things to avoid. So avoid overhead irrigation, because if that happens during the middle of the day and your bee that has been in a solitary nest in underground, it's going to get muddy and it could cover up her hole and she's not going to be able to find it. So if you're going to have overhead irrigation, do it at night when they're asleep. Weed cloth, obviously, they can't get to the ground if you've got weed cloth all over it. So save that for like paths and just very special places where you just absolutely need to keep weeds down. Working the soil too early, and then rototiller does not do anything for bee nests. So basically try and adopt a no-till gardening. Minimizing lawn. You've heard it. The thing to, you can plant pollinator gardens, you can plant lawn substitutes, but be careful if you're planting, like you say, okay, I'm going to plant a wildflower garden where I had this lawn. Make sure you take a look at the mix of seeds that you have, because so many of the wildflower mixes do not have what is native to our areas. So you have to look and kind of make sure that you've got a seed mix that is going to be native to our area and not just something that's going to become invasive and take over. The last thing is to embrace a more relaxed landscape. I originally said embrace messiness, but relaxed sounds nicer. So when the year is done, the flowers are done, don't cut everything down. If you have to cut down like your taller flowers, leave about 12 to 18 inches above the ground, and that provides sources for bees to nest in. You've heard it. Leave the leaves. Leaves are terrific for honeybees will often just kind of find a little place underneath a pile of leaves, and that's where they will overwinter. Don't use a shredder on your leaves, because there could be critters in there that you want to save. And then using prunings from trees and shrubs, make a brush pile. And they don't have to be ugly. I've seen some really attractive brush piles made into a teepee shape. So this right now doesn't look so great. It's, we have to embrace the messiness, but in a few months, it looks like this. It's just basically the life cycle. And that's where we've got a happy, healthy bee population. And then I have lots and lots of resources that you'll be getting in your list. And I think we're ready for questions.
Leah, that was wonderful. So many beautiful pictures and so much good information. I will tell you that most of the questions we got has to do with the mason bees, but I'll start with a couple other ones first.
Okay.
And one is, this person wants the best bees for a vegetable garden.
Okay, the best bees for a vegetable garden, if you want to do managed bees, are going to be leafcutter bees. And I don't have a lot of experience with that. I will be doing my first leafcutter installation this summer. but they're great at tomatoes, squash, no, not squash so much, cucumbers, things like that. Um, so you could try putting some out, or even just putting out a house, and see if you can encourage them into your yard. Other than
Right,
that, just having, part of what you want to have in your vegetable garden is to plant flowers that bees will always like anyway. So
right,
borage. What have you got?
like
You've
that.
got fabulous
Yes.
gardens. Yes. What do you plant around your vegetable
I plant a
gardens?
lot of those insectary plants, like you talk about, ones that are supposed to bring the beneficial insects in and
Hmm.
also brings the bees in. So a lot of those that are on your list also. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question that wasn't a mason related, and she wanted to know kind of the pros and cons of having a clover yard instead of a grass clover lawn.
Clover yards are wonderful, and they're just terrific bee sources. The cons, it depends on what you're looking for in your yard. But they're,
I'd say the only con might be if you are allergic to bees, you might step on one,
that's true.
you know.
And
But
yes.
but
It's so
other than
funny
that,
because
yo,
most bees don't sting, and that's what people,
true.
no, if you've got a clover lawn, you're going to get honeybees.
Right.
But yeah, so yes, don't do clover lawn if you're going to walk out barefoot.
Okay. The rest of
Good
the
point.
questions we had, people were really interested in your mason bees. One is, we're going to be having some really nice weather coming up, and this person said they didn't have any trees flowering right now. They're apple trees and things. So is this weekend going to be too early to put the mason bees back out?
I think so. And here's one of the reasons is that yes, it'll be sunny and warm. Like at my house, I've got quite a bit of PRS, and the red flowering currant are just starting. But I think it's too early. And, it's been such crazy weather. We could get another real cold snap. And
Okay.
so I would not put them out this year. And when I do put them out, I put them out in batches. So, like, I'll say, okay, this looks like I'm going to have a good, 5 days of really beautiful weather. I'll put out some, and then I'll wait 2 weeks and put out some more, because I have had the experience of putting them out and then getting a cold snap, and it rains for 5 or 10 days, and they just don't have the resources to sustain life,
Right.
and they die. So yes, I
Okay.
think this is a little bit too early.
Okay, good advice. This person has the commercially made Mason bee homes, and they don't have the parts that you can't remove them and clean them. So she wants to know, how is she going to clean them? What should she do, or should she just ditch them?
If she wants to send me a picture, um, through the website, that would be fine. I don't know, because commercially made, it could be the little things that you get at Costco that are absolutely useless. Or sometimes there's like laminate blocks that you can get, but if that you could put the nesting tubes in, the little white nesting
Mm,
tubes. I like the
yeah.
ones that are pre-slit. If those will fit in, then you could put those in and then take them out. But if she sends me a picture, I'd be happy to talk to her about it.
Okay. So she can just send it to 10minuteu2017@gmail.com.
Right.
Okay, great. All right. Now you talked about not using pesticides. So this person wants to know, um, having non-native ladybugs, bringing them into your area, is that good? And can she be using neem oil and diatomaceous earth?
Neem oil and diatomaceous earth are more acceptable than pesticides. We'll start with that. Jane, I think you probably have a better answer on those than I do.
Well, I know
Yes.
that a lot of those products say that they do not harm beneficials, but you know that they have to harm some beneficials just
Yeah.
by the way they work. And of course, you can talk about, it's not a good idea to bring ladybugs into the area.
Yeah. No, I don't. I'm thrilled when I find them, but
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of buying something from someplace else. And one of the Mason bee stories is we have a new Mason bee, not new, in the area. It's Osmia cornifrons. It's Japanese Mason bee, and they were brought in to the East Coast to help pollinate the apple trees, and they have since taken over in the East Coast. And now they're here in the West Coast, and I'm kind of like, they're good bees. I mean, they do a job, But if you have something that works well, why bring in something from that could take over? And these
Yeah.
guys, they come out before the mason bees. They will lay 11 to 12 eggs per tube, whereas our native will only lay 6 or 7. So it's just it puts a lot of pressure on the native
On the
bees.
native ones.
So
Okay.
that
Now, this person said she's seen in stores they sell pollen that is specifically for honeybees. She wanted to know if that would work for mason bees.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, we actually want
Mhm.
our mason bees to be pollinating our trees. So
Yeah. So
don't
what?
we instead of giving it to them, we want them to be out in nature, don't we? Now,
Yes. Thank
the
you,
last
Jane.
question's the last question's a pretty good one, and there's several people that have problems. This Houdini fly.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more about its life cycle and how are we going to take care of it? You talked about this person mentioned you talked about cleaning the mason bees helps, but now it's too late if you haven't cleaned your mason bees. So would you talk a little bit more about the Houdini fly?
Yes, absolutely. If you have not cleaned your mason bees, the best way to take care of that right now is when you put your mason bees out, you put them out in a like a mesh um, bag that you can see through. And then as the bees hatch, you have to check it, every day or so. If you see a Houdini fly and they're little tiny, you just squish it and then you let the mason bees out. So that's
Oh,
one way to solve that problem right now. And I have several people that I know that have, oh, I didn't clean it. And I'm kind of going, I'm
mm,
just getting really particular about that is because this is something we can do to help save the mason bees. And
okay,
let's just do it. So yeah,
okay.
so mesh bag, put the bees in there, and then when they hatch, let them out, but then squish the Houdini flies first.
If you're doing it in the fall and you're getting ready to clean them and you open up your straw, what does the Houdini fly look like at that time? What's its life cycle right then in the fall?
It is larva, basically. So it's a very
Okay.
sticky larva, and there'll be like 5 or 10 all in one little area. So there's just a
Okay.
clump of sticky white larva.
So they are, if you had mason bees out there right now, those Houdini flies are have they already emerged from their larval? Have they pupated and then
I do
or
not
what?
know that. I
Okay,
would think so. I have not experienced that because I clean mine in the fall. But
right.
since they come out at about the same time, I would think that's what you and that's why they recommend putting it in a mesh bag because they're going to be coming out at the same time. So
Okay.
yes,
Well, great. Well, that's all the questions we had. Thank you, Leah. That was wonderful. Really appreciate it. And I'm
thank
sure
you,
everyone else
thank you,
did too.
Jane. Thank you.